next month is the month the Bleach anime returns, and so to celebrate that, I wanted to talk about a character who has a big, impactful role on the war against the Quincy's, one of the scientists of the Soul Society, and no, it's not Mayuri Kurotsuchi. We've already looked at his role in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, so instead, we'll be taking a look at the role that Kisuke Urahara plays in the final arc of Bleach. Because it is quite a substantial role, which I was very happy to see, because Kisuke is something of a barometer for the stakes of the current conflict. When he's involved to the degree that he is in this arc, you know that means everything is going down. And since we're going to be looking at Kisuke's role throughout the entire of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, of course that means there will be spoilers for this arc of Bleach in this video. And before we get started, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now for more Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up as well and help support the channel. I really would appreciate it. And if you want to take that support for me another step further, we do have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can get videos like this one early and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. As always, I want to give an enormous shout out to each and every one of you who is a patron of the channel. It really means the world to me, and thank you all so very much. So the thing with Kisuke Urahara is he's a fan favourite character who has always kind of remained on the sidelines. He has always been that sort of shadowy, puppet master mentor style character for Ichigo who doesn't get involved until the going gets tough. As I mentioned at the start of this video, when Kisuke gets actively involved in the conflict, you know that that's when things are really starting to heat up. Now, he does play some kind of a role in the war against the Urankar fairly early on, but it's quite a laid-back, lackadaisical approach to the situation. Like, he turns up and messes around with Yami right at the start of that arc, and then again he kind of turns up and sort of just messes around with Lupi and Wonder Weiss later on as well. And then he's not seen again after the main characters go to Hueco Mundo until the very final battle against Aizen. And I remember that colossal gap in time when we last saw Kisuke to the end of the Fate Karakura Town arc. It just felt like he had completely disappeared from the story. Happily, for those of us who are Kisuke Urahara fans, which, based on my character popularity poll I did for 100,000 subscribers, is the vast majority of us, he plays a significantly bigger role, certainly a more active role, I would say, here in the 1,000-Year Blood War. And considering this was the final arc of Bleach, where the stakes should have been at their absolute highest, their absolute most critical, I was very happy to see that. Because if Kisuke is taking a threat seriously, you should too. Kisuke first appears very early on into the arc when Ichigo and his friends decide they're going to head to Hueco Mundo under news that it's been taken over by a new sinister villain, and Kisuke basically says that he can organise their trip for them. And it is funny to kind of see the approach Kubo takes here. Obviously we don't need to go through the whole rigmarole of showing them creating the Garganta or going through all of that again. It's just funny though how easy it is now for them to get to Hueco Mundo compared to when it was enemy territory. But what's really awesome about this is Kisuke doesn't just facilitate their journey to Hueco Mundo, he goes with them, and immediately, right off the bat, Kubo is setting expectations for what Kisuke is going to be doing in this arc in comparison to previous arcs. He's no longer that mentor sitting on the sidelines, setting up their journey but then leaving them to it. He is actively going with them, and I really do love that because it does make everything feel just that little bit different. It does make you sit up straight and think, okay, Kisuke's actually getting involved on the ground from the very beginning, and I think that is so cool to see. And it's little details like that, like characters like Kisuke being involved from the very get-go, having their boots on the ground as soon as the fight gets going, that really make it feel like a much more all-encompassing, all-worlds collide style war. Unlike the Urankar arc, which, while I do absolutely love it, don't get me wrong, it definitely feels like more of a sequential series of battles, almost like one after the other, and then Kisuke only needs to get involved right at the end, whereas here, everything is going crazy right from the very beginning, and that is partly why I love the 1,000-Year Blood War. But anyway, Kisuke joins them on their trip to Hueco Mundo. Ichigo immediately kind of gets involved in the battle, battling Sternritter J, the jail, Kirige Opie, while Kisuke goes and rescues Dondochaka with Pesce. There's a really nice blink and you'll miss it moment here where Kisuke is involved in this kind of gag moment with Dondochaka and Pesce when suddenly he stops and he turns looks over his shoulder, and it might be a bit of a strange moment. You might be wondering, well, is he seeing something? What's going on here? But in actuality, he is sensing the imminent arrival of the Vandenreich appearing in Soul Society. The war is about to begin properly, and he suddenly realizes that something is wrong. As that first invasion is heavily underway and the battle in Hueco Mundo is unfolding concurrently, Kisuke is kind of taking a relaxed approach, sitting up against one of these stones of Hueco Mundo on the phone with Askin from the 12th Division. And here I want to stop again briefly to say, I love this. I love that after the Arrancar arc, and of course the events of the Lost Agent arc, Kisuke is effectively fully reintegrated back into the Soul Society. Not only is it well-deserved, it's an amazing bit of world building. I absolutely love to see it. And we can presume as well that characters like Yoruichi and Tessai and the remaining Vizard who haven't become members of the Gotei 13 again are also allowed to come and go as they please, but we really see it with Kisuke more so than anyone else. Like, he's actively on the phone with members of the Research and Development Division, the people that he used to know back when he was a member of the Gotei 13 himself. So this is really awesome to see him just casually chatting with Askin, as almost as though nothing has ever gone down between them. And for me, that was the sort of thing I longed to see. Like, it makes sense that Kisuke doesn't come back as an official member. Obviously, Mayuri has effectively his old job now, and so Kisuke is not going to come and dethrone him like that. But I like that he's almost working like a consultant for the Soul Society, and I really do appreciate that, and it really makes good on the story changes that happen in those last two major arcs. Obviously, Kisuke's name is cleared after everyone realizes that Aizen is the real culprit behind everything, and then Kisuke actively helps them bring him down, helps them rehabilitate the Vizard, and then in the Lost Agent arc, we can presume that it's kind of Kisuke and Isshin's proposal to the Gotei 13 to help them restore Ichigo's lost powers. So it's great character progression, but after finding out just how badly things are going in the Soul Society, learning about the stolen Bankai and all that sort of thing, Kisuke decides that Ichigo has wasted enough time here in Hueco Mundo, and he uses an unspecified Kido to blast Kirige through the chest, seemingly killing him and buying Ichigo a chance to go through the Garganta back into Soul Society itself. As Ichigo makes his way through the Garganta back towards Soul Society, Kisuke is delivering him intel that he has collected so far on the Quincy. And again, it's just really good seeing his character so actively involved already, seeing his intelligence, his analysis, his reconnaissance being put to such great work. I love that he just generates like this augmented reality, like a keyboard on this stone to type to Ichigo. That sort of thing is so great to see, and it would basically be the beginning of Kisuke setting up a base camp in Hueco Mundo. Unfortunately for Kisuke, he underestimates Kirige Opie, and using Ranso Tengai, Kirige gets back to his feet and blasts them all in the back and then moves to kill them, but they're rescued by a mysterious assailant who butchers Kirige and then points his blade at Kisuke. Of course, this mystery attacker, their apparent saviour, would turn out to be the 6th Espada Grimjo, who Kisuke eventually makes a somewhat unspecified deal with. This deal would come up a couple of times, but it's difficult to know exactly what Grimjo gets out of it. We find out much later on the deal is basically Grimjo sees through one of Kisuke's enemies to their demise, and that turns out to be Askin Naklavar much later on in the story, but it's hard to know exactly what Grimjo gets out of that. Maybe that's something they'll flesh out a bit more in the anime. It could be something to do with Ichigo. Knowing Kisuke, he would have happily set Ichigo up for a battle against Grimjo. Later on, Kisuke lets the Soul Society know that despite their communications having been severed, they're all actually okay. And then even later than that, he appears via comlink thanks to modifications he's installed inside Kon's eyes, which was honestly pretty funny, especially since we get some of the nice banter back and forth between him and Mayuri, which again, this arc is extremely good for. And basically this whole situation is just letting everyone know again that they're alright, but more precisely letting Ichigo know that everyone is alright, giving Orihime and Chad a chance to speak with him, and basically saying to Ichigo, you don't need to worry about us, we're okay, we're going to be staying here for a little while, and you now need to focus on what matters to you, which in this sense is both getting stronger and figuring out the truth of his origin. Now, I mentioned a second ago that this arc is very good for the relationship between Kisuke and Mayuri, and it absolutely is. Both of these characters are MVPs for the Soul Society in this war. They both really go above and beyond in aiding the Soul Society in the battle against the Quincy's, both providing reliable information that helps turn the tide in more than one instance. And yet, of course, they are both almost constantly at odds with one another, and it's so awesome to see that played out. We've known really ever since the Turn Back the Pendulum arc that Mayuri has a massive chip on his shoulder regarding Kisuke, and Kisuke being superior to him, not just in intelligence but literally being his boss in the research and development department when he founded it. And the relationship on these two characters is something I'd love to do a separate video on in the future, but let it be known that the 1000-Year Blood War arc does wonderful things for this relationship, because really up until now, outside of Turn Back the Pendulum, these characters had never interacted. We knew that Mayuri didn't like Kisuke, didn't like being compared to him as Ichigo does in the Fate Karakura Town arc, didn't like any kind of mention of Kisuke whatsoever, but they really get the chance to interact in this final arc as well, and you get to see that relationship kind of change and deepen, as well as Mayuri's actually willing to kind of put their differences aside, at least for the time being anyway. Anyway, we're getting too ahead of ourselves with that. Next up in Kisuke's role in the 1000-Year Blood War is actually taking a few steps back, and instead we get to see what he was up to 20 years prior to the main storyline as part of the Everything But the Rain mini flashback arc. It's really cool seeing Kisuke getting involved here as he's living out his life in exile. He's been out here in Karakura Town now for approximately about 80 years or so, and now we are so close to the present-day storyline. And of course, Isshin, Ryuken, and Masaki are the trio at the centre of everything here. Masaki has been bitten by the Hollow White and is beginning to succumb to the effects of hollowification, obviously considerably severe on her because she is a Quincy. Urahara bumps into her as she's leaving school one day and senses something is wrong with her soul. That's a really cool, really sinister moment, and he eventually catches up with all of them when Masaki is about to die, and basically says to Isshin and Ryuken that he can save her, but they'll have to make a pretty serious choice, and she'll basically never be the same again. And there are some lovely, lovely moments here. Isshin obviously doesn't know who Kisuke is just by looking at him, as they didn't serve in the Gotei 13, at least not in the captaincy, at the same time. And there's a really lovely moment where Kisuke's like, it's called hollowification, I've been studying the effects of this for 100 years now, obviously since his exile. And Isshin's like, 100 years? You must be a lot older than you look, and who are you? And he's like, I'm Kisuke Urahara. And Isshin's like, I know that name. And again, that's like really cool, because obviously they've been teaching the Shinigami that Kisuke was some horrible traitor who experimented on a bunch of captains and then fled. And so that's really awesome to see a quote-unquote modern-day captain run into Kisuke like that. I think that was a really great move, and it was just really well handled as well. Kisuke explaining the effects that he had come to know of hollowification from both Turn Back the Pendulum and his own experiments, this idea of soul suicide, and how he came to the conclusion that an opposing force against the hollowification that's now ravaging Masaki's soul can hold it, bind it in place forever, and Isshin can be that opposing force as long as he's willing to give up his Shinigami powers, at least until Masaki dies. And much like the relationship between Mayuri and Kisuke, Everything But the Rain is something I absolutely need to do a video on in the near future. Maybe once it's happened in the anime, we'll talk about it then. But just fantastically well written, and Kisuke's part in it is so good as well, because it measures up so well to Turn Back the Pendulum, to everything he was working on then, this idea of the untraceable Gigai coming back into force as well. It's all fantastic, and I was ultimately very satisfied, not only with the role he played in Everything But the Rain, but also how basically it all came together to form the story of Ichigo's parents meeting and how Isshin lost his powers. Later we see that Kisuke has actually set up a proper base of operations in Hueco Mundo in this place called the Neagle Ruins, which is never really explored in any great detail, but effectively everyone that he is working with in Hueco Mundo coalesces in this one place. They all converge and come together. We also see that there's a mysterious Arrancar there as well, who again we know to be Grimmjow. And we also know that Nell should also be in the hideout as well, and also that the Fullbringers Riruka and Yukio would later arrive there too at Urahara's beck and call. So it's just, again, awesome to see that he's making the most of a bad situation. I love that you really get to see the scientist in him as well, when he is actually just turning this place in Wako Mundo that was once enemy territory into his own stronghold. And again, we kind of see Mayuri do the same thing as well, highlighting some of the similarities between them. And then we find out that Kisuke is working on Kirge's Bankai stealing medallion, trying to figure out exactly what's going on with this thing. Then, as things are starting to look pretty dire, captains like Soifon and Hitsugaya have fallen to their Quincy opponents. Suddenly, Kisuke calls up Mayuri and lets him know that he's figured out a way to restore the stolen Bankai. But it's once again hampered by Mayuri not quite being ready to work with Kisuke yet. And Kisuke's like, don't hang up on me, I've got the solution. And Mayuri is like, I'm not listening to any of this, goodbye. And he tries to hang up on him. But then, of course, Kisuke arrives through a Senkaimon being like, kidding, I was here all along, which is a really great moment. And there's just really, one thing I really love, and one thing that I think is so good, and honestly, I think very underappreciated about the 1,000-Year Blood War in general, is the use of foot soldiers. The use of other Shinigami who don't really do anything in like the Arrancar arc, but again, their presence makes it feel more like a proper war here. And it's awesome hearing these research and development guys being like, is that really Kisuke Urahara? The Kisuke Urahara? And then when he actually appears, when he reveals that he can restore the stolen Bankai, one of their guys is like, he's amazing! And then they all turn to him like, you shouldn't be saying that around Mayuri. I love all those tiny little character details. It makes the whole thing feel more alive. But anyway, Kisuke does arrive in the midst of this battle and basically flat out asks for Mayuri's help. Mayuri's like, nothing I can do, I can't help you, we're basically screwed over by the Quincy, and he basically just doesn't want to work with Kisuke whatsoever. But Kisuke just turns to him and says, that's not entirely true, is it? After all, we do have that room, and he points to Mayuri's blindingly brilliant room that he's created within his laboratory, basically being like, I know you can help me. You've done a really good job, by the way, figuring out about the Quincy shadows, playing to Mayuri's ego a little bit, but now I need you to just, I need your help, so let's put our differences aside and work together. And it seems like Kisuke flattering Mayuri a little bit, giving his ego a little bit of a boost, is enough to get Mayuri to work with him for the time being, as they all basically move into this brilliantly blinding part of the lab. They basically take all of their lab equipment and stuff it into this room to create this dedicated stronghold for the Shinigami that no Quincy can enter. And it's from here that they activate Tente Kura to connect to all of the captains both in and outside of Seirete, currently in the middle of battles or otherwise, and Kisuke reveals his latest invention, the Shinei-Yaku pills. They're basically these black pills that will holofy a captain for a very brief amount of time. We've done a video on this idea of the holofied captains before, but because, as we learned in Everything But the Rain, again tying this together very nicely, Quincy are extremely allergic, essentially, to holo Reiatsu. Kisuke theorizes that by holofying the Shinigami, that will also affect their own Bankai, which is still linked to them despite being in the possession of the Quincy, and the Quincy will violently reject it because their bodies can't handle the holo Reiatsu. It's a little bit convoluted, but on the whole, I think it's actually an incredibly well-done explanation. I remember back in the day, I was really anticipating them getting their Bankai back, just, I don't know, by some stupid meme that didn't make any sense whatsoever, but this is something Kubo really put a lot of thought into, and I genuinely really appreciate that. And what's even better about this is Kisuke's role in Everything But the Rain comes back to help them here, which is fantastic. But as planned, Kisuke contacts all of the Shinigami currently engaged in battle, and again, there's another nice moment here where he's like, if you don't know me, my name's Kisuke Urahara, and Shinji's kind of like, there's no one here that doesn't know you, you dumbass. And that's such a great moment, because Shinji is well aware of the effect that Kisuke is effectively a celebrity at this point. Not only was he once a wanted criminal, but he kind of returned as one of Soul Society's saviors at the end of the Urahara arc. But he says to everyone, I'm sending you all these pills. If you have a Bankai, touch it, and it will go straight into the depth of your soul, and it will activate, and your Bankai will return to you. And thanks to this, Hitsugaya and Soifon are able to defeat and turn the tables on their Quincy opponents. Despite this small victory, however, the battle is still not going great, and Kisuke and Mayuri are now both in their small lab, kind of observing the fight as it's going on, when suddenly Ichigo contacts Kisuke. Basically, Ichigo is like, how is everything there? Please don't worry, I'm on my way. And all Kisuke can do is really smile, and he's like, I've got it. We'll wait for you, Mr. Kurosaki. And they've just come so far. Like, Kisuke is no longer Ichigo's mentor, really, but more his equal, his friend, somebody who he can now rely on. Kisuke can now rely on Ichigo to be there for them. And I just think that's so good. And Ichigo knows he can kind of leave it momentarily in Kisuke's hands. It's a terrible situation, but, like, they're all there for each other. And it's just such a difference from the effective schoolboy that Kisuke was trying to train all that time ago. But the battle changes once Yhwach escapes to the royal palace, and Kisuke shows up in front of Ichigo and the others, and he basically says that, I can help you get to the royal palace, but it might take me a bit of time, and he takes them all down into that base, that stronghold within the 12th Division, where he reveals that Mayuri has built a one-time use replica of the Kukaku Flower Crane cannon, which they will use to blast them up to the royal palace, but this time Kisuke won't be going with them. There's a great moment here as well where Kubo makes good on one of the much smaller subplots in the Thousand Year Blood War that's easily skipped over, I think, and that's the Vizard's subplot. And I say it's very small because we only see it twice prior to this moment, but right at the very start of the arc, Hiyori notices a kind of tear in the fabric of the world, which is this idea of a distortion being created because the Quincy are killing so many hollows, going back to this idea of all of the worlds collapsing in on each other. And then, much later on, just before the second invasion begins, we see that the Vizards have been tasked with patching up the distortion between the worlds and collecting the energy that was generated from those tears. And now here we are getting the payoff to those moments where Yoruichi was working with the Vizards to collect all of that energy that they were able to salvage from the distortion gaps created in between each world, and now Kisuke has all of this energy in front of him in different bottles. And it's this energy that's eventually going to power the rest of them getting to the royal palace. So Kisuke fires Ichigo and the others up to the royal palace to kind of stall Yhwach as best they can, while down below he continues to make preparations for the rest of the Shinigami in and around the stronghold. Hiyori and the other Vizards arrive, and there's a really nice moment where Hiyori talks to Kisuke about where Ichigo and Yoruichi have gone, and he says that he's already sent them ahead, and she's like, how can you do that? How can you send them off to potentially die? Don't you care about what happens to them? And Kisuke's like, it's all for the sake of the Seirete at the end of the day. And it's easy to forget that these two were captain and vice captain 110 years ago, I think, because this is one of the only interactions they have since then. But it's a real nice one to see that although they did eventually get on, Hiyori hasn't really lost her distaste for Kisuke in many regards. She doesn't like him for much the same reason as other people wouldn't like him, I think, which is that, as I've mentioned before on the channel, he is very much a big picture guy. Kisuke is not a particularly emotional person. His days in the Omnitsukido in the 2nd Division probably helped with that, as also being one of the jailers as well, who was in charge of the Maggot's Nest, also probably helped with that. But his outlook on life is basically that everything I do and everything everyone else does should be for the status quo, should be for the Soul Society, and ensuring that everything can keep running. In my opinion, there's no doubt in my mind that Kisuke would always be on the side of good, whatever that means here. He's not a villain, and I don't think he ever would be either. But that's purely because the Soul Society, the Seirete, is, in our reader's perspective, the good guys, the heroes. And it's only because of that we don't see Kisuke as a villain, but there's no denying he's unethical, he's in some ways immoral, and that only serves to make his character more fascinating. And I do love this moment where Hiyori just flat out calls him out on basically using two people who are supposed to be dear friends of his. Once he has issued a summons to everybody else, ordering them basically to abandon any opponent they have and just rush immediately back to the stronghold, he collects everybody together and gives them a lay down on the divisions who weren't able to make it back, and what's kind of going on with everybody in the middle of the fight. Kisuke takes charge, saying that thanks to the heavenly armor that Yushiro Shihoin brought them, they should be able to all together assault the royal palace. Hiyori comes in and pours that collective liquid energy that they had onto the floor, which will help fuel their travel up to the royal palace. It's an immense amount of energy, the energy generated from the tearing apart of two different worlds, and that's all being collected for their usage now to hopefully create a gateway up to the royal palace. This whole sequence where they are trying to build a gateway up to the royal palace was somewhat lambasted when this was coming out weekly for lasting a long time, and it does last a very long time, but I'm going to say it, this is one of my favourite parts of the arc. I think the amount of character interaction and development on display is totally worth it. A coming together of many different Shinigami faces from across the story, characters who have never interacted before, getting a great chance to do so now, is really wonderful to see, and I love how this all plays out. I think it's awesome. It's like a mini arc in and of itself. There's a great moment where Kisuke asks the Vizars to put on Shihakusho and then return and join them for the journey onwards. And it might feel like a small, insignificant thing, like why bother? Why bother asking them to put Shihakusho on when they're here in their normal clothes as it is? And also, they're not officially members of the Gotei 13. But that is the point. As far as Kisuke is concerned, and as far as everybody else should be concerned, these guys are members of the Gotei 13, and if they're going to fight one final battle together where they might all die, they might not come back from this, they should all feel like one collective unit, one family. You know, they should put those differences aside and join together as members of the Gotei 13. And that's why they're asked to put Shihakusho on, to be a part of this, to be a part, officially, of something bigger than they are. It's like almost like an olive branch that Kisuke is extending to them. Which I always think is really interesting. It's funny, though, that Kisuke doesn't feel the need to put a proper Shihakusho on and still just wears his own clothes, but apart from that, I do still think it's a really great moment. But the stronghold around them suddenly begins to collapse as Kisuke realises that the Soul King has been killed, and Ichigo and the initial advance team have been too late in being able to stop URAHARA, and apparently the Zero Division have probably been wiped out as well. Basically, it's the worst case scenario playing out before them, and Kisuke can really, for once in his life, only look on as Ukitake attempts to enact the Kamikake and hold the worlds together for as long as he can. Later, Aizen arrives, and Kisuke notes that Aizen has become even more powerful in Muken than he was before, and then even after that, the Quincy arrive to try and stall their progress, at which point Kyoraku tells Kisuke to carry on trying to build a gateway and they will deal with their new opponents. However, the majority of the Quincy who arrive actually want to help them build the gateway, and so they all come together, including Mayuri Kurotsuchi, who arrives and helps them out again, utilising his Reiatsu amplifying machine, and they finally get this gateway built. And again, that's another really good moment. Mayuri actually responds to Kisuke's summons, albeit a little bit later than everybody else, but he also doesn't have a real problem with Kisuke running his laboratory without him. He's happy enough for him to do it. Kisuke, along with Kyoraku, leads the charge into Varvelt, URAHARA'S ultimate palace, the final zone, essentially, of the Bleach storyline, where URAHARA has completely conquered the royal palace and turned it into his own image, and Kisuke watches as URAHARA creates his massive fortress from the ground, effectively urging them all to come and take him on if they can. As they make their way to Varvelt, Kisuke notices Mayuri disappear, he senses him fall in battle, and then later on when Lil Barrow is sniping members of the Gotei 13, Kisuke tries to take note of who's actually still standing, and then even later on than that, as they get closer to that central part of Varvelt itself, Gerard Valkyrie intercepts them, at which point Kisuke actually leaves the main Gotei 13 party to try and catch up with Ichigo and the others, specifically Yoruichi. Now, crucially, on his way to find Yoruichi, Kisuke actually discovers the injured Grimmjow who was poisoned by Askin and heals him, and it's here that they make a plan far in advance to to deal with Askin when Kisuke eventually gets there. Kisuke arrives just in the nick of time to save Yoruichi from Askin, as she has been overpowered after having been poisoned by one of Askin's gift balls. But Askin actually notes that he knows exactly who Kisuke Urahara is, as Urahara has been designated one of the 5 war potentials due to his unknown means, his unknown methods, the fact that he can basically deal with any situation by coming up with ideas almost on the fly, and the fact that he is prepared for virtually everything. But of course, Kisuke believes it to be just a gross overestimation. However, he has injected Yoruichi with a drug that boosts her immunity and allows her to continue fighting, but as she tries to do so, Kisuke wants her to instead activate a mysterious transformation. Although Yoruichi doesn't want to do it, Askin overpowers her again, so Kisuke forces the transformation upon her, activating her Shunko Kokubyo Senbi form, basically transforming her into an electric cat. As Askin struggles to keep up with Yoruichi's new form, Kisuke kind of explains to him exactly what's going on and how she can now deal with Askin's ability, and that she now has a Reiatsu that changes something insane like 48 times a second, meaning Askin can now no longer keep up with her power and develop an immunity to it, and so Yoruichi manages to defeat him. Although the immunity-boosting drug begins to wear off and Yoruichi begins to succumb to the poison, Kisuke says that first and foremost he's going to make sure Askin is dead, except of course he's not, and they're suddenly engulfed in a massive gift ball known as the Gift Ball Deluxe, and Askin has activated his Vollständig. This is a wonderful, albeit criminally short battle now, where Kisuke actually takes on the Sternritter himself. They have a lovely conversation where Kisuke questions Askin's loyalty to URAHARA, where Askin explains his motivation for following the Quincy King, and Kisuke kind of finds it abhorrent, despite being, like I said, a somewhat immoral and unethical person himself. The truth actually is that Kisuke can't abide by the idea of being a follower, being someone who just watches change happen. Much like Mayuri, Kisuke says that a true scientist would want to be the one who enacts that change, who makes that change happen, rather than simply sitting by it and allowing someone else to do it. Askin kind of agrees with Kisuke. Again, their conversation is just so good, but he basically says that he's not going to change and he still wants to see what URAHARA will create, at which point he throws a gift ring at Kisuke, destroying his eyes and blinding him, forcing Kisuke to, of course, activate his long-awaited Bankai. Using his Bankai Kanon Biraki Benehime Aratame, Kisuke manages to overpower Askin, and as it looks like the fight might drag on a little bit, suddenly Askin is punched through the back from behind as Grimmjow tears out his heart. And it's here we see the results of Kisuke's long game plan. Basically, when he found and healed Grimmjow on the way to this battle, he told him that he would set him up a pathway using his Bankai into the Gift Ball Deluxe, allowing him to get the drop on Askin. And we can see as Askin collapses to the ground, there's like a small doorway in the floor through which Grimmjow probably jumped out of. Askin finds it unbelievable that Kisuke would think so far ahead and think about every possibility the battle might have. We get this wonderful moment that really kind of details everything about Kisuke as a character in a nutshell, where he has this kind of crazy look on his face. He looks creepy. The stitches down his cheeks also help to really kind of emphasize the creepiness factor, as he sort of says, well, why wouldn't I prepare for every eventuality? If I lose, I'm dead. That's what it means to be in a war. And Askin says, I think I realize now why you're so scary. But unfortunately for them, as Askin dies, his power goes haywire, basically turning the Gift Ball Deluxe into a death trap, as it looks like Kisuke and Grimmjow might be done for, both of them being incredibly heavily poisoned and overpowered by Askin's last-ditch attack. Grimmjow crashes to his knees as Kisuke collapses to the ground, spewing blood all over the floor, his Bankai collapsing behind him, and as all of his previous wounds seem to reopen as his body weakens, he says he's got no choice but to now leave everything to Ichigo and Rukia, after which point he collapses face down on the floor. Now, this is the last time we ever see Kisuke in the Bleach manga, which I honestly thought was unforgivable back in the day, and I still don't really like it, but the existence of the Hell Arc makes it a little easier to stomach. Now, we know he survives, and we could have gleaned that anyway from the 1,000-Year Blood War, because we see Neliel outside, Clearly, Kisuke left her away from where the fight might take place in case of an emergency situation like this. And she says that she can't believe one of the outcomes Kisuke predicted is actually coming true. And now she has to dive in there and rescue him, Grimjo, Yoruichi, and Yushiro. And presumably she manages to do just that. But the last we see of her is her diving towards the gift ball as it kind of collapses in on itself. But we know from the Hell arc that Kisuke survived, so it makes me feel a little better about that. It's just a shame that after Kubo did so well with this character in this arc, involving him so heavily from day one, that his fate would just be left totally up in the air. And Kisuke is such a major character as well. I hate that, to be honest. I still don't really like it. There's no reason why we couldn't have had one shot of the Urahara shop in those last 2 chapters, but it is what it is. That is Kisuke Urahara's pretty massive in-depth role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. It is basically what I wanted from a character of his stature, to see him so directly involved in this ultimate war against the Quincy's was honestly really satisfying, and it's so cool to see him actually on the front lines and really just inspiring them, working with them, and using his intelligence to undermine the Quincy at every possible scenario, while also making good with Mayuri, who really hates him, but it's so good seeing them come together for the good of the Soul Society. But that's it for this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Kisuke Urahara's role in the Thousand Year Blood War arc. I can't wait to see him in the anime, particularly his fight with Askin Naklavar, although that, of course, won't be until the very end of the anime, essentially. But I'm still really excited for what's to come. Alright, guys, make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't done already, and until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.